Hi, good afternoon. Welcome to the fortnightly MPI and CBAFF Seafreight project webinar. Before you start, you are reminded that there must be no discussion of prices, searches, fees, cost, particular customers, revenue, market share, or any commercial sensitive topics. Okay, we're now going to start the session. If you have any question, you can raise your hand, type your question, or ask to be allowed to speak, and I will open the microphone for you. Thank you. You can go ahead, Sylvester.
Thank you, Corinne. Thank you, CBAFF, for organizing this webinar. So welcome everyone to the joint fortnightly Customs and MPI DTR Seafreight webinar. The purpose of this session is to give you an update as to where we are at with DTRC, talk about a quick update on project, talk about phase 2 and phase 3, some of the key messages that we have prepared for this session based on our learnings so far, and then we will open up the session for questions. So Daniel, who's on the call, was sharing his screen at the moment, so we'll go through the slide back. Thank you, Daniel. Right, as I do all the time, DTRC is for the movement of uncleared cargo. For anyone who's hearing this for the first time, it is a requirement from the agencies for every point-to-point movement, which is a customs controlled area or a MPI approved transitional facility. Now, it is done through trade single window, but we know that a lot of stakeholders use their own business IT systems, and you will use your IT system to request that DTR movement. It's part of the inward cargo report process, and that's what's used for submitting DTRs. Now, the intention for DTR is basically to remove the collector's permit process, which is a manual paper-based approval that's been given and that doesn't provide any real-time tracking. DTR is going to replace that, and DTR will also replace the approval or the application required for a BACC. So two birds with one DTR, and that's the intention. You must remember that DTR is not customs clearance or MPI clearance. It is just an approval to allow the movement of that container or uncleared cargo. Thank you, Daniel. So we've talked about our phased approaches in the past. A quick repeat on where we're at. Phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 1 is about just moving FAK containers from port to a CCA or TF. And phase 2 is once the containers devanned, any uncleared LCL consignments that need to move between CCAs will follow a DTR process. And phase 3 is DTRs for any uncleared cargo moving from port to port via sea. Now, phase 1 is in progress. A lot of you have joined, but there's still a big number that are yet to join. So we're calling that green at the moment, and we're onboarding. Phase 2, we've kicked off on the 27th of March. We're going through an initial phase of analysis where we are trying to figure out what is the data we need to capture as part of this process. And phase 3 is about we're working with ports and shipping companies because they are the two major stakeholders involved in sending correct DTRs and in interpreting the responses. Right. I'll just quickly move my screen. Yeah. Here's a quick look at the phases in detail. Phase 1 is onboarding. We've tested quite thoroughly the port to CCA moves, port to third-party CCA moves. The port to inland CCA moves, that's been allowed now. There's a single DTR required to move it from Metroport, so from Tauranga through Metroport and to your CCA. So that's been approved. We are waiting to do some testing with the other two inland ports, which is Conlinks and Midland. So the success criteria for phase 1 is that we have our top 20 FAK submitters on board, or 80% of the volume coming through DTRs. With respect to the third point, which is the inland port, we want all 3 inland ports to be on board. So that's when that is achieved, we will say, yep, phase 1 is successful. Phase 2, we're testing at the moment, like I said. We don't have any current measures to figure out whether we're successful or not. It all depends on that DTRs can be submitted quite successfully by whoever's submitting those movements, and freight moves easily without requiring any intervention from the agencies. Similarly, for phase 3, we're putting in a transition plan so that we know that not all shipping companies will be able to comply by the 3rd of July. So there will be a transition plan when they submit to us, when they will be ready. We will put them on that transition plan and make sure they're onboarded. So the idea being that we have less than 1% of errors with those that are submitted being problematic, as in getting the wrong codes and messages going to the wrong place and so on. So that's our success criteria for phase 3. So this is just to give you a quick overview. Thanks, Daniel. This is our stats from on the 18th of April. So we had about over 500 DTRs submitted, and you can see the volume that's coming through and from whom at this level. And you can also see which ports have been receiving most of the DTRs. If you look at the table on the right-hand top, some have submitted DTRs for Napier and Wellington, which is something we've said do not use because we only have 3 ports active at the moment. That is Auckland, Lyttelton, and Tauranga. Lyttelton, as you know, is currently paused because of the issue we spoke about. That is, they've got holds being applied back on even after a DTR approval has been received. So as of today, they're working on fixing that problem. We should have that ready for testing next week, and then after that point, Lyttelton will be back on board as well. If you look at the graph on the right-hand side bottom, we said 80%. As at the end of last week, we had about 60% of the volume of FAKs or submitters on the DTR process. So half of our top 20 are on board. If a few more of those come, we will definitely surpass the 80% threshold, after which we'll say the DTR for FAKs is mandatory from the 3rd of July. A quick look at the ports. I think I've discussed this in my comments before this. So Tauranga and Auckland are active. Little Port is paused, and we expect that fix on the 1st. All the other ports are not in scope for phase 1. The main reason being 98% of the volume of FAKs happen through these big ports. So we've told them not to focus on coming on board with phase 1, whereas use that time and energy to get ready for phase 3. Similarly, we used the free time we had to make sure that we could onboard a lot more of our submitters. So it was time well spent, rather than wasting time in trying to get the smaller ports on board where it wouldn't make a big difference to our phase 1. A quick note on if you are moving if you've not used the DTR process to move your FAK container from Tauranga through Metroport, here are the steps. This has come out through an email. It has also come out through the CBAFF newsletter. So there was a concern that do we have to have 2 DTRs for this movement? The decision is that we need just 1 DTR, which covers the movement from Port of Tauranga to your final CCA. Now, the only thing you have to be mindful of is the data required in item number 2. Your port of discharge will be Tauranga, your location of goods will be Tauranga, your transit destination should be your final CCA where the container is going, but you need to include the delivery notification party 8865L for Metroport. So this is so that once the system recognizes that delivery notify party, Metroport gets notified via email that this container is good to go, and that completes that process. So take note of this of these points when you're submitting your Metroport moves for anyone who hasn't done it yet. It will be similar when we start Midland Port and Conlinks as well, but don't do that as yet till we finish our testing with those ports. So Metroport is on at the moment. Do we have Carlos on the call?
Yes.
Yeah, Carlos, you want to give us a quick update on phase 2?
Yep. So just on phase 2, so we're currently working through some process and scenarios with some with some of our pilot partners. So for phase 2, it's around the movement of devanned or deconsolidated cargo, which comes out of the FAK container at your facility that then has to be moved on, or a piece of that cargo then needs to be moved on to a different facility for clearance. So what we're doing is we've got about three or four different options that we're kind of testing at the moment, all require different data inputs. So we're kind of trying to capture that and run through and see and get some feedback on where the kind of issues are around how that data is captured or has to be submitted. So for phase 2 scenarios, on these tables here on the left, we have kind of the current process. So a container is devanned at a facility. That facility then creates a release note. If any consignments are held on the FAK container application, then a BAC was required to move those goods. The receiving facility sends a release note to the sending CCATF. So the receiving facility organizes transport. Step 5, the sending CCATF releases consignments as requested to the transport operator. The goods are transported to the receiving CCA, and then the receiving CCATF receives consignment, confirms receipt to the sending CCA facility, and then both parties keep records of the consignments that have moved. So under a future process, it's quite similar except for the steps 2 and 3 at the beginning. So it's kind of around the release note. So the container is devanned at the first facility. Then the agent or sending or receiving CCATF submits a DTR to move those consignments from the first facility to the second. Then the sending facility receives a DTR response from TSW saying that the goods are coming to their facility and no release notes required. So then it follows the same process after that. So the receiving facility organizes transport and then it carries on through the same process. So it's just that starting point which is different. Thanks, Tim. So just on that phase 2, so we're looking over the next week or so to have some options finalized, and then we'll start building on those. So there's still some testing to be done and some discussions around that. Thank you.
Thanks, Carlos. So from the 22nd of July 2023, DTRs will be required to move uncleared sea freight from one approved facility to another approved facility. So that's the mandate we're putting through. And after this point, you will not be able to use the collector's permit to move containers from the port. Now we'll move into the Q&A session.
Feel free to ask questions, raise your hand or put it in the Q&A box. We've got Emma as well from who's your rep who might take some of these questions. So feel free.
Yeah, just while we're waiting for them to come through, just so everybody's aware. So what they're saying about phase 2 is our standard LCL, which you would pick up under bond and move back to your yard if for whatever reason you're waiting on a commercial invoice or commodity specific documents or clarification around things for clearance. So that will take over that process where we currently just, you'd send a truck in with your collector's permit and move it back. And just for anybody on here that is on CargoWise, we do have a sort of a cheat sheet. So if you'd like that, then please reach out to me. I will write my email address in the chat box and I can send you a copy. All right, looks like a nice, easy session without any questions. I'm going to take that as good news. Thank you all for joining. We hold these fortnightly, so just keep an eye out on the CBAFF newsletters for future details. Cool. Thank you all.
Oh, there's one come through, is it?
Ooh.
Oh, cannot see your email.
Ah,
if you
okay.
click, if you
I
click the
will
chat,
answer.
yeah.
Hang on.
Mm.
1 second.
We could put it as part of the pack as we send it out, Emma. Not a problem.
Yeah, we can do. Yeah, we can
Yeah,
put
we
it
just
as
put
well.
it at the end of the pack where the questions are.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks everyone for your time. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Yeah, thank you very much. So the next webinar would be on the 10th of May, same time, 2 to 2:30 on the 10th, and there will be a notice in the CBAFF communication about it.
Cool.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.